You are listening to Attractive Relationships, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of relationships and communication. I'm Rico Armstrong, your host and advocate for attractive, happy relationships. In a world where relationships play a crucial role in our personal and professional lives, understanding how to communicate to connect with others is essential. Transform your communication skills to increase your social status, your social confidence, and help you gain the best relationships you can have. Welcome to Attractive Relationships. All right, so today's podcast episode is going to be focused on what if I had to start from scratch learning these skills of communication and relationships, where would I start from day one? Well, it's what sparked my interest in communication and in relationship building was recognizing the effect at a young age that your words could really have. And I progressed to a point as a public speaker where I could give a public talk into what seemed like a large audience at a time. It can be one or two or 300 people in an audience. And I could be completely comfortable, conveying whatever discourse or message was being conveyed. Um, and what was really interesting was I was really nervous every single time. But if I really gave it enough thought, people would come up and say, "Wow, that talk you gave was so insightful or so inspiring. It really affects my life this way." And it was really cool to see how you can affect a large amount of people in a short amount of time. So that's where kind of the spark of communication started. And I would say the spark of figuring out how relationships work started as a coach years later. And then seeing how those two skills and understandings combined and how it affect our daily lives is just I find it absolutely fascinating. Honestly, the challenges that I would be facing from the beginning actually had little to do about communication itself. The skills of like communicating in specific ways to connect with people are very easy to understand and very easy to grasp. The biggest struggle that I had was in knowing myself better, because there was a phrase that somebody told me once that the people who can read others the best are the ones that know themselves the best. And if people have a hard time connecting or understanding others, they probably struggle to understand themselves. So as an only child raised by a single parent whose mother died when they were 14, whose people that I was supposed to be able to trust, like my aunt and uncle, I lived with them and they stole all the money that my mother had left for me that was going to provide for my future. So like there's trust issues. I thought my dad was something, but he wasn't that person. We have a great relationship now, but my world is flipped upside down. And like, there was nobody there to kind of really guide me to say, Rico, here's what you're good at, and all these things. It was kind of difficult to know yourself, let alone get to know other people. And it made relationships hard. And when you grow up with trust issues, it makes relationships hard. So the issue really isn't in the technical parts of connecting with people with words. The hard part is truly knowing yourself so you know how to choose the right relationships that work for you. If I had a chance to go back in time to my younger self, I what would I change? I don't know how much I would actually change until I was at a point where I'm ready or considering dating and that age, like living on you're graduated from high school or college and you're an adult, you want to do adult things, you want to live on your own and get your own place and you want to have these relationships with other people. That's the point where I think if I could go back and change anything, I would tell myself to take the time to really understand what my purpose is in life. And the reason why I say that is because that is highly critical in choosing the right relationships. The problem that I had is I felt that relationships was all about what can I do for you? I'm going to change for you. I'm going to do for you. And I was thinking that would be reciprocated. But what was actually happening is that people may have been trying to give me that same kind of energy, but doing it in a way that didn't align with who I truly was or my purpose. And it caused issues, not because of a lack of trying, but simply because I didn't know my purpose and I did, let alone articulate it. But that would be the advice I would give myself is take the time to find your purpose before attaching yourself to relationships. So some of the things that had a huge influence on this topic of communication and relationships, there was only really one person in my life that had a huge impact. And this is a person, she was like a second mother to me. And she had some sons. She was a widow. And she would talk about her husband as the greatest human being that has ever walked this planet. And she would tell me stories about how the relationship was so tight. They were married for over 20 years before he died, and fathered three sons. And she said in those 20 plus years that they were married, they had three fights. That was all. So she was really big in helping me understand one of the big secrets about how relationships work and how to know if you're in the right one. But outside of that, everything was, I probably read close to 40 books now on communication and relationships and dynamics of sorts. And as I read these 40 books or so, there was just a few things that it was the same message repackaged. And I was able to just take that and be like, huh, why isn't nobody just talking about these basic things if it's what's in common between everything? And so those books, I'm probably going to make a list available of these books that I've read, probably the top 5 or 10 books. And then the community that really helped me learn and layer these skills that I was learning is in the fitness community. You can imagine, like, if you've ever been a coach before, I've never been a parent. I don't have kids right now, but I imagine it's something similar where you're so focused on the development of somebody else and you have to be able to communicate well. And as a group of coaches, one of the best teams I ever was on was a group of coaches who, again, had the same similarities, the same basics, but we were all different in our own way. So we all had the basics, but one coach was really excellent in her memory of what people were doing, and that's how she held people accountable. And another coach was really excellent in making things light and fun. Right. But those two things on their own is not what helped them be awesome. Well, I mean, they helped them, but it wasn't the make or break. And being around that community of recognizing how we all have the same structure, but we can still be unique in our own ways, man, I can't describe just how awesome being in that environment was. Hey guys, real quick, I'd love to connect with you beyond these episodes, which is why I'm excited to tell you that Attractive Relationships recently started an exclusive newsletter just for you. You'll get behind the scenes stories and additional exclusive content to aid in building your personal attractive relationships. So if you'd like to be kept in the loop, simply click the link in the description below the episode. I think some of it was just natural. I would read a book and I'd be like, wow, this sounds really cool. And then I would take that, or I'd listen to a podcast of some expert. I was like, wow, sounds like really great advice. And because I was in this coaching realm, it was easy every day to apply new things that I learned. And in almost immediately or the next day, I could see how it had an effect. So, like, for example, when I first started, there was a coach on Instagram. Again, this is back in 2016, and he was a charisma coach. And the first thing he said is, "Your tone of voice makes a difference." And he talked about 3 different tones. Okay. And he said, and if you really want to have an effect, you want to stay away from this tone and do the other ones. And I did that in class. And it was amazing how immediately everybody responded to whatever it is I was saying. I was just like, wow, because I'm a private person by nature. I'm more introverted. I am not the guy who wants the attention, but I have to be that guy when I'm in a group. Years later, I read another book, and this may be more familiar with you. If you've ever heard of Chris Voss, and he wrote a very popular book called Never Split the Difference. And in that book, guess what he talked about in part? Those same three tonalities. And so I'm able to kind of like see how there's again common thread and how you do. So when you're talking about building a regimen, it's just like I read and I practice and I read and I practice and I read and I practice. I hear things and I practice. I see somebody else doing something. I practice and then I say, hey, all these things are the same. And then it just kind of snowballs from there and you just get better and better and better. What are some of the achievements and the projects that I've been most proud of? I think it's really the culmination of the career that I left in fitness. One thing that I started to realize is that, I got into fitness because, again, it's the hero's journey, right? I was fat and out of shape, and I was like, this sucks. And it took me too long to get the weight off. I'm going to help other people not suffer like I did. And what surprised me about being in the fitness is I thought I loved fitness because of what it did for me. But what I loved more was the relationships that were built and the connections that were made. And what I realized is I loved coaching in it of itself more than I loved fitness. And I think that shone through because I had the opportunity to train other coaches. I had an opportunity to manage a top 10 studio in the nation with the company. And when I finally left Orange Theory after 6,000 plus classes, somebody said, this is the biggest goodbye we've ever seen. And just recently, my wife still goes to Orange Theory, and she met a new head coach at a different studio. And the head coach said, oh, you're Mrs. Armstrong, you're Rico's wife, right? And she's like, yeah. Oh man, Rico's a legend. My wife come home, she tells me this, and I was like, I don't think I've met this coach before. And my wife's like, well, he knows you, and you still have a reputation that is still apparently affecting other people. That in itself as an achievement, to know that what I did has affected people's lives even after I left is is hugely satisfying. This whole, if I could leave you with something, uh, I would say this: the basics of communication to connect with others is not really complicated. There's a lot of people out there that will say, here's like this. By the way, I used to be very fluent in sign language. Here's a list of all these things that you have to do. And that's just from one person. And then you go to another site and another person and say, well, here's this list of all the things. And it's really a lot more simple. You don't need an entire chest of tools. You just need a tool bag. And you need to use those tools for your specific instance. That's it. So don't feel like you have to be overwhelmed when it comes to figuring it out. There's literally 3 C's of communication that will help you connect with anybody. And as far as relationships, if you understand your purpose, everything falls into place. You'll choose the right ones, you'll communicate well, you'll get what you want out of life. And hopefully I'll be able to help you along the way. As we come to the end of another episode of Attractive Relationships, I want to express my gratitude to you for tuning in. Your support really does mean the world to me. Now, if this episode brought you any value, I would truly appreciate it if you shared this podcast with anyone that you think could benefit from our discussions on effective communication and relationship building. Until next time, remember, great relationships start with great communication. So stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep building those attractive relationships.